Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.
Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more from filmmakeru.com, or of course follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week we interview film professionals to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by VFX Supervisor Chris Wright and VFX Producer Parker Chehak for the series C on Apple+. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
I guess my first question for you, we have a lot of young people just getting into the industry watching these series. What would you say is the difference between the VFX Supervisor and the VFX Producer in your roles?
In this particular show, it blends. It blends in some ways. Technically, I'm in charge of all things creative, and Parker's in charge of all things financial. But they blend. We help each other out. We're iron sharpens iron, so we're constantly collaborating. And Parker has some ideas. Some of his brilliant ideas got into the show, and actually, I don't think I affected anything in terms of producing. So I guess it's really just a one-way street.
So what attracted you guys to the show C?
Yeah, I would say it's the opportunity to be challenged. I mean, this show is a challenge top to bottom. And the sheer number of shots, the logistics of those shots, and the scope of the show offered a nice canvas to just build upon.
Yeah, we basically got to create worlds, and I think that's a huge benefit. That doesn't happen that often, where you're creating something out of nothing. I mean, obviously our show is still based in reality. I think it's you find it in the sci-fi genre, but it's still based in reality. It's it's 300 years in the future of North America, of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and all that. So there's some reality to all that, and we tried to play with a lot of that. Obviously working with our art department in building a world that was familiar and yet decayed. So we have real little snippets of reality, snippets of memories of oh yeah, that's what that is. We built Travante's season for season 2 episode. I guess it was one. And we did our research. What is it's supposed to be Pittsburgh? So what does Pittsburgh look like? So we pull up the skyline of Pittsburgh and we put all the buildings out there. Like, well, they're just buildings. It's not like Manhattan and you get those iconic buildings of Manhattan or some of the other Eiffel Tower. So apparently one of the vendors, I guess, they were showing things out, and one of the artists said, "Oh, that's Pittsburgh." Like, how do you know what Pittsburgh looks like? But people do, and so it's really part of our fun challenge was to just to take on this scopy show, this massive show, and create worlds and do it in a realistic way.
So how do you do that to make like something that's, because it's 600 years in the future? So how do you make, what does Pittsburgh look like? Like when you sit down, like how do you discuss that and figure out like what should Pittsburgh look like in the future?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of conversations about how far we take things, some creative license. And well, would that be completely gone by now? Probably, but we needed to, we needed to remind people, we needed to look similar. A lot of the conversation we had about the broken down highways that we built for episode 1, and things like that. How much decay do we actually want to put into all this? Would there be carcasses of rusted cars? Yes, and that was in season 1 as well. Would they be as intact as we're showing them? Probably not, but it's finding that line and how far we're going to push things to sell the realism of decay, and yet dialing it back so that it's not just completely flat wasteland of nothing.
Yeah, and also but also including elements of nature taking over. That the humans are gone, and now the bindage has taken over everything, and water levels have changed. Sort of speaking towards what I would call our impending disaster of climate change.
Yeah. Now, Parker, how do you bid on something like this when like the scope is huge? So how do you bid on something like this, not knowing like what details might end up having to be in it, or you might just know the schedule and a rough budget?
We had all 8 episodes pretty much from the beginning, so we kind of knew where we were going and where the big episodes were. We knew that the last episode was going to be insanely large. As far as how we bid it, it was a process of, I had people that I like, Chris had people he liked. We came together, we said, these guys would be great for this, these guys would be great for this, and we kind of went to them and said, hey, can you do this? Here's what I have, here's what's possible. And they would come back and say yeah or no. And so we would just kind of follow their lead and let them, we work on a complete openness and honesty with our vendors. So if it was too much, they would say too much, we could do this much. And it was just a conversation.
Okay.
Parker, how do you account for some creative inspiration that I find later in the process after you've already bid things out? And maybe that's rhetorical.
I go and get on a call and get yelled at, and then we do what we do.
So what would you say was, one of the more challenging parts of working on C?
Schedule?
From my perspective, it's schedule. It was logistics, really. One of the big things about the show is that every single character is blind. Well, not every single, almost every character is blind, and they all have an eye treatment. So we're doing eyes to everything, which is almost every shot in the show, plus the scopy, fun, big stuff on top of that. So it's 2-handed, 3-handed, 4-handed vendor pass-offs, and that just created this like web of logistical nightmare that, all to be done in a very condensed timeline. So it was a challenge.
And we're just trying to maintain an authenticity to what the show is. It's a lot of it can get glossed over, but the thing that I'm so proud of with the show from top to bottom, and all of our departments, everyone invested in their attention to detail and making sure that everything was right. In a lot of cases, I have producers or studios that say, well, the audience is never going to know that, never going to see that. But the reality is that they feel it, and so it's all that little attention to detail that that really makes the show come alive and feel real to the audience.
How do you determine what should be done in VFX versus what should be done practically? Like, I think about like what you're talking about with the eye treatment. I almost feel like some people are like, well, why didn't you put in just contacts? So what is it like, is it better effect, or is it like, how do you determine something like that?
I mean, the eye treatment predates us. Park and I started season 2. Season 1, it was determined how all that was going to happen, and I think it was a comfort level. And if you think, some of our big, massive, scopy shots, we've got 300, 400, 500 people in a shot. You're not going to put 500 contacts in or something like that, and just the logistics, I think, of all of that. In a lot of cases, I'm constantly telling people, don't do visual effects, do it real. If you can do it real, do it real. But if you can't do it real, let's do it right. Let's talk about it, let's plan it, let's organize it. And there's a lot of times just logistics. I mean, I think our industry, and certainly in particular our department with visual effects, it's for lack of a better phrase, I think it's created some real lazy filmmakers, but more in the sense that we're out on the streets, and I'll use an example of New York. Out on the streets of New York, and you're pointing a camera like, oh, we got to do this really quickly, and then you look this way, like, oh, we got equipment in the way. Well, how much time does it take for a crew to stand down to clear all that stuff away to get out of the shot versus us just painting it out? And it's some of those things where we're constantly having that conversation and that battle, right? Of do we do it practically? Do it visual effects? If we do it practically, it's going to take X amount of time. There's some level of flexibility that visual effects does provide in creative design and making some changes and choices, and things like that. But generally speaking, I'm constantly pushing production to do things real. If you can do it real, definitely do it real. Real is real. We can make things that look very real and believable, but real is real.
So now you're putting all this effort into your craft, but like I find that budgets are getting tighter and schedules are getting tighter. So how do you ensure that you're going to maintain the quality of your art, but still meet those tight schedules and demands?
I would say that really comes down to the vendors, and it's. I mean, I think that's a big part of my position with Chris's guidance to find people who are going to fit in the box. The way I look at it is we're given a box at the beginning of a show. We have this much time, this much money, and this much demand. How do we cram all that in the box, and who can do it? And so we met with a lot of vendors over the course of the show for a lot of reasons, COVID being one of them. But also to push the bounds and to find new people, find people who wanted to stretch a little bit and work within, what we had. And I think that's the only way to do it, is to pick their best people to do the best work.
And Parker and I had, hours of conversations where we were just putting the puzzle pieces together. Like, okay, well, this vendor can do this. What's their capacity? What do they do well? I mean, you can go to a facility, and some of the larger facilities, some of the behemoths, maybe they probably can do a lot of things, or a lot of things very well. But really, what it comes down to is the artists that are doing the work. The name on the label doesn't necessarily represent the artist they have. The tough part too is, and this goes back to our transparency and open, honest communication, and relying on vendors to be honest with us about these things, is that we can be looking at different vendors and find somebody new and look at a reel and think, wow, that's really great, but none of those people who did that work are even there anymore. And it it certainly represents a benchmark for what the vendor represents, what they can do and what they've done in the past, the level that they achieve to their own their own quality and their own integrity to that. But we're constantly having these conversations, and sometimes we're shifting gears. We decide we're going to go this way, we're going to have this vendor work on this particular sequence, they're very good at that, and then some things change, and then maybe they're better suited to handle this other thing, so we pull some of this away and we put that over here, and we're constant conversations between Parker and myself and the vendors to say, what's your capacity now? Especially when when COVID was hitting, the world was busy. It was every week we'd have our meeting like, hey, so any chance you have a little more capacity? Have you opened up a little bit more? What's going on? Because things are constantly moving.
Now, I apologize if this is the wrong information, but we were researching, and I think you worked on the Rockabye episode, and specifically the digital soldiers. Can you tell us what about the digital soldiers? What were some of the challenges of creating that?
I mean, I think everyone can recognize that creating digital humans is not an easy thing to do. And,
especially blind ones that walk in a very specific way with a very specific pattern. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, when COVID hit, I mean, the story was written in a certain way. Originally, as conceived and developed, it was going to be this massive battle between two armies. And when COVID hit, it changed a lot of things. It changed. We lost locations. We couldn't have so many people. And well, how do we do this battle between two massive armies with only 10 people on camera? I mean, how do you do that? We made a couple of adjustments, a couple of changes, found a new location, something that was more confined. We went into the trenches and turned into more trench warfare, where it really worked out in a lot of ways for the story in particular, where to have a small army versus the big army in a big open battlefield, that's not necessarily so strategic. So but the question to us was, well, could you make digital soldiers? And the answer was yes. But we had conversations with our vendors, and the talented team over at El Ranchito put together a little proof of concept with one of the shots we had previously, and we there were a few times along the way where a shot would come in, a version would come in, and I'd check in with Parker, and I said, Parker, this looks good. He said, you want to approve it, don't you? I said, I do, but I'm not going to. I'll give notes. But they looked so good, and so we were handing these off, this proof of concept, and we were showing this on set to our producers, our director, our DP, and the response was, what am I looking at? Yes, mixing in digital soldiers with real soldiers in a way that you can't tell the difference between them was exactly what we needed. So it was in that moment where they looked to us and they said, okay, yeah, now this can be done. Now we're greenlit. Let's go. So it was their attention to detail obviously starts with scans and building of the assets and working with cloth and simulations and mocap to get all the movements right. We worked closely with our own movement team that specifically focuses on blind movement and blind performances and blind action to make sure that we were capturing the essence of what a blind soldier would do. And again, back to some of the creative liberties we're taking with some of this, but it was always a matter of maintaining the integrity of the story and the characters, and on a technical level, making sure that it looked as real as possible.
So did you bring in blind actors to do the mocap?
We didn't. We had so one of our producers, Joe Strecce, he's blind, and so he has his own movement team of people who are watching screens, watching performances. He's hearing everything and hearing how people are talking, and he can hear movement. And the rest of his team, they're looking at everyone's movements and what they're doing, and in between takes, they're giving little notes. Blind person wouldn't do this, they wouldn't do that. They have hours of training with our main actors. We work with background constantly, and so we had recorded some videos from our movement team, and they're all dance, have dance backgrounds, and so they understand timing and movement and all that. So we used sighted people who were familiar with how blind people move based on their own experience and their expertise.
And did you use AI to sort of expand out and like build the army even larger, or how did that work?
It certainly was some crowd sims. When the army is marching across the field, there was certainly some simulations in terms of that, and running through some of the different movements, different styles, some variations. And everyone has the same gait as they're walking, but the basic concept being the same. That you have your walking staff in front of you, and you're maybe linking arms, you're linking shoulders, so you're moving together, and there's some military strategy.
Strategism.
I can go with that too. In terms of how the pods of the army are moving, and those soldiers are moving that way. But once we get into battle, it just very much becomes you're listening, you're hearing things, you're coming through, and you kind of take a lot of creative liberties in terms of battle.
So what would you say is your favorite, or the scene you're most proud of the work you've done? I know that's like choosing your favorite kid, but
obviously the ice breaking, the quarry was such an ambitious choice to strive for. It was so well done. With the collaboration of all the pieces, special effects, creating the platforms for the actors to interact with, and reskinning those with proper ice textures and all of that. The water simulations. I mean, just the complexity of the collaboration of filmmaking involved in that scene was really quite remarkable. But there's certainly some other scenes, locations. I think our council room we built digitally and extended digitally. It was just beautiful. It's so striking to me, the way that ended up. And really so much of our show is really very meticulous. I mean, we're designing and building worlds that don't exist based on what we expect, and then putting the attention to detail into it to make sure that it feels as real as possible. We were, I mentioned there's a podcast, a group of people who love our show, and one of our actors caught wind of it, and it spread around, and so I started listening to it, and they break down every episode for an hour or so, every scene there, and they get into it, and for a while I thought, it's kind of a bummer. They're never talking about visual effects. And then I realized that's actually exactly what we want. We don't want people to recognize necessarily that there are visual effects happening. We want to build a world that's so believable that they are immersed in the story and immersed in the characters and what's happening. And so that's something that we certainly take a lot of pride in and put a lot of effort into across the board. Our from on set to post, and our vendors, and everyone's really paying a close attention to how everything fits and all of that. But I guess the short answer being that that ice quarry and the water simulation and the ice break was pretty impressive.
How about yourself, Parker? Is there a particular scene you're proud of?
I'm always a fan of the sort of, we'll call it a throwaway shot, where, you know, we have a transitional shot going across woods. There's nothing there. So we would be tasked with come up with an idea, put something there to make it feel post-apocalyptic. So we would put an old ship there, or, you know, we had a wind farm at one point in season 2, and that kind of stuff. That speaks to me. That's you know, they're not crazy, expensive, scopy shots. They're just there to build the world and sell the world. And so you have these little moments of just like, oh yeah, that's right, we're 600 years in the future. Okay, let's go fight some more. And those I really enjoy. I think those are satisfying to me as someone who's watching the show as well as working.
Now, I have one last question for you guys. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
There's a show called, there's so many. There are these shows they're just fun, right? You know, they come on TV and like, oh yeah, I'll watch anytime it's on. I'll watch it. There's a movie called The Replacements.
Oh, that's a great one.
It's an old Keanu Reeves movie,
Yep.
Gene Hackman, and it's simple, but it's just fun. It's just a fun movie.
Yeah.
Anytime that's on, I'll always stop.
TBS for years was just putting it on.
Yeah.
Like, they bought a window and they were just like, we're gonna milk this for everything we have.
Yeah, yeah, that's a fun one.
How about yourself, Parker?
I will watch How It's Made on Discovery Channel for stretches of hours at a time. It just is calming and soothing, and I love it.
I always think they must have just raked in cash. It's like no dialogue. Could sell it to so many countries.
It's stock music. Yeah.
Stock music. Yeah. You just need a camera person.
And it's fascinating. And you just melt into it and you're like, oh, that's how you make a baseball bat.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.
Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.